At risk of startling everybody terribly, it's 7 o'clock and we're going to start. So thank you for coming. Welcome to Mount Dennis. The Mount Dennis Community Association, we were asked what was different about it, and really it's because we try to reflect the entire community. It's not just homeowners, it's not tenants, it's businesses, it's people who want to build, it's people who support us, it's the charities that are here. We all try to get together and make things better. And we work as hard as we can with our politicians, and we try to support everyone who wants to be involved. So thank you very much on behalf of the Community Association for coming out tonight. Our keynote speaker tonight is Paul Bedford, and Simon will be telling you a lot more about Paul when he does the introduction. After that, we will have the business portion of the meeting. You'll hear about our finances. We'll have our election of our board and our named officers. Then we'll break for coffee and snack, and then we'll do a little roundtable discussion, although we don't have any tables. But we will have discussions, and we will see what it is you want to say to Paul and how we should be going with the redevelopment of Mount Dennis. Our special guest tonight is Councillor Francis Nunziata, who will be the official for our elections. Have I missed any other elected officials here tonight? I believe we have representatives from our MP and our MPP, so they will be speaking at halftime. It has not been a great year for Mount Dennis. We thought we were in great shape for our eco neighborhood, and then the Liberal government had $1 billion for cap and trade, which was going to flow to Toronto for carbon reduction, and it just disappeared, and we were starting over. Anyway, I will begin with the acknowledgement. We're going to begin our MDCA AGM by acknowledging that we are meeting on the Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples since the glaciers retreated. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been the stewards of the Humber watershed. In particular, we wish to acknowledge the ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, and in particular, the Mississauga of the New Credit, on whose territory we are gathered today. Of local specific interest here in the Humber, this area is covered by the 400-year-old Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples, which made this area a shared resource for all. That treaty still exists, and the wampum belt documenting it can be viewed at the Royal Ontario Museum. 400 years of shared territory here in Mount Dennis. I think that's very significant, and thank you to the people who were here before us. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous people who have made both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. Going forward then, I'm going to ask Simon, our secretary, to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Thank you.
Paul Bedford and I actually go back a long way. We were both hired by the City of Toronto Planning Department, the old City of Toronto's Planning Department, in July of 1973. Oddly enough, we didn't meet for 5 years because he worked in the North Toronto Planning Office and I worked in the Waterfront Planning Office, and we very occasionally were in City Hall and never quite at the same time. But I heard good things about him even then. Later we got to know each other quite well, and we also kept getting mistaken for each other, which was quite interesting. In fact, on one occasion, even my wife came up and took his elbow before she realized that it wasn't me. My brother mistook him for me in a picture in the paper, and on one occasion I was at a farewell to another commissioner, and Paul had made a terrific speech, and somebody at the back of the room came up to me later and said, "That was a great speech you gave." Anyway, but I've heard an awful lot of great things about Paul since then in any number of ways. Most people that I know consider Paul to have been the most capable chief planner the City of Toronto has ever had. He certainly made his mark. He was the first chief planner of the new amalgamated city, and frankly we are extremely fortunate to have him here tonight as our guest speaker. He's not only somebody who's extremely knowledgeable, he's also very clear and forthright and will answer your questions in a straight up and down way. And welcome, Paul.
I hadn't heard the story about the elbow. I'm glad it was just the elbow. Anyway, listen, thanks for inviting me here. What Simon asked me to do is talk to you about the Urban Land Institute Leadership Program that I'm involved in. And I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to cover the relationship of what we're going to do in Mount Dennis to what city planning staff is going to do and the economic development staff. So there's a lot of sort of balls in the air here. I'm going to try and clarify everything as best possible and look forward to the questions. So let's just get started. Go ahead. So what's the Urban Land Institute? Here's their short form mission here. It's really about land use, and it's a worldwide organization, chapters in every country, all over the place. And the North American chapters are very, very active in their respective cities in terms of getting involved in what's happening, trying to help communities deal with change and those kinds of things. The Toronto chapter is the fourth largest in North America, which is quite amazing because it's only been in existence for about 10 years. So it's very active. So the program is called the Kurtner Leadership Program. They asked me to lead it. This is the third year I'm doing it. And what we do in a nutshell, we started off in 2017, we went into the Bloor-Dundas community. And as you know, Bloor-Dundas has got the subway, the up, the go, the Loblaws site, lots of opportunities for change that are coming forward there. And to make a long story short, we invite mid-level career professionals who are working in the Greater Toronto area. They're architects, they're planners, they're lawyers, they're landscape architects, they're developers, they're financial people, etc. They've been working roughly 10 years in their respective field. And they apply to get into this program every year, and they pay for it, and we get about 25 people a year. How do they get in? Their boss nominates them as the key rising star in their respective organization. So the end result is kind of exciting because you get 25 really hotshot people, male, female, all the mixes, and all of them have great experience. Then what they do is they go into different communities, and generally, you know, we're invited to go into these areas that are experiencing change. Bloor-Dundas, if you know that area just down the road here, is one of them. It's going to develop in a whole variety of ways, given all the transit access, just like you're going to have here. And what they do is they go through a 6-month process that we're going to start here. And the challenge for them is to develop a vision and action plan that we then present to the community at the end of the 6 months, and it's free. We just give all this information to you to help you deal with your own objectives and your own initiative. So we did that for Bloor-Dundas, very well received. Last year we went to Maine and Danforth, somewhat similar, if you can picture that area, Go Stop, Subway, etc. And this year we've selected Mount Dennis. And Mount Dennis, I don't have to tell you why, go to the next slide. These are the people that have signed up for the program. And this gives you a rough idea of who they represent. They're private, public sector, all these organizations, Evergreen, First Gulf, Habitat, consulting firms, a whole wide variety. And they're the positions that they hold now. So they're going to be divided tomorrow morning, actually, into 3 different teams of multidisciplinary teams to work on the Mount Dennis project. This gives you a rough idea, very rough. We had a kickoff walking tour on October 26th. Some of you were at the November 17th kickoff meeting that we had in the church up the street, and with presentations from the Mount Dennis Community Association. And then we are going to launch through this kind of agenda right through the next May and present the findings to the community at large. Next. On the first walking tour, we took all the participants through food share, obviously the tour of the Mount Dennis station, which most people, they've read about it, they've heard about it, but they have no idea how massive it is and how huge it's going to be. And that really opened a lot of eyes. And Learning Enrichment Foundation, so a lot of great things happening in this community, and it's only going to intensify. Next. So here's the rough study area. You can orient yourself here, Eglinton, Weston Road. This dashed line is, generally speaking, the study area that these people are going to be looking at. And obviously, the transit node is at the heart of it, as you would expect. They're going to look primarily at 3 things. They're going to look at what I'll call the station lands, which includes the no-frill site up the street. Because something big is going to happen there. I can guarantee you. The question is what? And now is the time to think ahead 5 years and prepare for that change and figure out what you guys want to see happen here. The next is a revitalization of the Weston Road commercial strip, which needs some attention for sure. And a third area is tied in with the eco-neighborhood theme that your association has taken the lead on. So all those three things have to come together in this exercise. Next. This is some of the shots when we toured the station. Some of you may have done this, but even I was really blown away at the magnitude, the scale, how fast it's coming along. Metrolinx told us that probably by this time next year, the station will be totally complete. And they're targeting for 2021 to open the crosstown. I hope that happens. It may slip a bit, but generally speaking, they tell me they're roughly on target. But it's going to be a game changer for not only the city, in terms of the Eglinton Avenue East-West spine, but obviously for Mount Dennis. Next. Some other shots. As I think you all know, there's going to be a go stop proposed here, as well as an up stop, as well as the crosstown. So when you add the crosstown, the go, the up, and all the TTC surface transit, it's going to be, people say, the 2nd or 3rd largest transit hub in the city after Union Station. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude of transit that's going to be coming to this area in the future. The other thing I think you know, but this line, the GO line, is on the Kitchener corridor, the Kitchener-Waterloo high-tech corridor. So there's another connection to the future in that area. Next. Okay, so what are some of the things we're going to have these people look at? One is this kind of midpoint location between Pearson and the downtown core. The downtown and Pearson are the 2 largest employment centers in this region. And Mount Dennis is going to be on this transit corridor, east-west and north-south, basically, with this huge industrial employment zone designated in the official plan. And so the future change, I think, will surely involve residential, but I hope it also involves employment, because you absolutely need employment as well as places to live. You need the whole cycle of activities. So that's one of the areas that they find interesting. What are those opportunities for major employment to be created in this area? Next. And this is a schematic diagram, as you know, with the Weston stop now, and there'll be this stop in Mount Dennis in the middle, and another one, by the way, down there at the Liberty employment area. So there's going to be 2 more stops on that line.
Where is that, Paul? Can you show
Liberty? Yeah. Down here, just in here. If you go west from, yeah, in that area. Yeah, yeah.
Below St. Clair.
Below St. Clair. Yeah. Next.
Isn't there one in St. Clair?
Not that I'm aware of. No. No. Next. Okay, so let's just zero in a bit. I'm going to have a few slides on the BIA and then on the Community Association, then I'll try and put this together. The BIA, of course, has been around for quite a long time, and it has done some interesting things, but I think its future is bright when you look ahead what they have planned. Next. This is controversial, I'm told here, the necrophilia. I saw it coming up in the bus from the subway tonight, and at night I think it looks fantastic. Whether you like it or not, it's an icon in a way that is starting to be known citywide. And it's obviously been incorporated on the BIA banners. Next. Some of the people, I stopped in and had a coffee on the way here at Super Coffee at the corner, a relatively new business in the last 5 years, seem to be doing quite well. Works very hard at it, and you know, she's, I believe, the vice chair of the BIA as well. Next. This is something that BIA did a couple of years ago at Christmas. They got the Drake General Store and put in one of these shipping containers and opened up over a couple of weekends, and basically a temporary store. And why the Drake General Store, you know, down on Queen Street? You think, what's the connection to Mount Dennis? Well, apparently the person who runs the Drake General Store down on Queen Street lives in the Mount Dennis area. And she said, yeah, I'm willing to try it. And what I'm told, it was temporary, it was an experiment, but it brought some people out and they made some money over those weekends. So I think one of the things that BIAs have to do is push the envelope a bit, to experiment. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, but you got to keep trying. So that's what happened a few years ago. Next. We also, and when I was teaching at the U of T, I got involved with the Danforth East Community Association. And this is the area in the Danforth, roughly from Coxwell over towards Woodbine. And if you know that part of the city, a lot of empty stores, you know, subway underneath, of course, but not a hell of a lot happening. And what's interesting about the Danforth East Community Association is the BIA was dormant, and the residents were the spark behind getting the community and the BIA together and making things happen. So here's some of the things they did. Next. So they have vacant store problems, and they came up with this idea, which has been tried in lots of places, is to put, you know, images in the storefront window, in this case a butcher, which is something they wanted to see, in the window. And people driving by, you know, started to say, oh my God, there's a new butcher in the neighborhood, which of course wasn't the case, but it sparked interest. And they've tried different approaches to get people to donate their store for a free month's rent, to try it for a month or two, to get temporary businesses in, and they've actually had quite a bit of success. And they are driving that revitalization of that piece of the Danforth. It's quite interesting if you ever have time to take the subway east to, say, Coxwell and walk up to Woodbine and see what's going on there. Next. Back to Mount Dennis. This apparently is what is going to happen starting December 8th, I think, this Saturday. This here's necrophilia. This little vacant storefront to the south is going to donate their store for free for a month, no rent. And the BIA is getting a series of temporary vendors to come in starting December the 8th. I believe Penguin Books is one of them. I believe you know, various local craft people are coming in. There's a whole variety of different uses that are going to just come in on the weekends just for the month of December and to get some activity and action there. So we'll see how that goes. Next. So back to you and the Community Association. You guys should be pretty proud of what you've accomplished so far. You've kick-started this idea of this eco-neighborhood, which is pretty simple when you really think about it, because you're surrounded by an awful lot of green on the Humber River Valley, the flats, and the Black Creek ravine, and the river valley. And you really, I think, have the objective of trying to see this community develop from A to Z based on eco principles, and eco neighborhood principles. And you've made some advances in these areas, and this community association is far better equipped than I am to talk about that. But we want to sort of tie into that and piggyback onto that and see what does that really mean in the context of the future, and how can you really achieve this in a meaningful and economically viable way. Next. So here's some questions. I won't read them all. You can look at them. You know, you can answer these maybe better than I can, but it's an important series of questions. What does it mean? How is it different than what you have now? What are the implications? Zero carbon footprint. You know, Mike talked about the cap and trade problem being canceled, but that doesn't mean you just give up and go home. There are other opportunities that need to be pursued. This employment opportunity I've already highlighted, I think is a big one, not just residential, but employment. This is huge here, because 25% of the population of Mount Dennis is low income, below the city average. 36% of the population are single person households. There is a huge need citywide, but also here for affordable housing. So you can talk about it all you want, but how are you going to get it? What are the strategies? What are the mechanisms? What are the incentives? How are you going to actually move it forward? Obviously, the eco-neighborhood theme with the Humber and the Black Creek open space networks. And this bottom one I put in bold because this is my sort of challenge, I guess. How can Mount Dennis maybe become a pilot neighborhood for the rest of the city to demonstrate its potential for these things? So inclusionary zoning is a concept that's been around for a long time in the US, but not so much here. The provincial government gave the City of Toronto the authority to pass inclusionary zoning. What does that mean? It means the city can decide and adopt an official plan and zoning policy that says you need 5, 10, 15, 20, 25% of all new housing has to be affordable, and it has to be provided by the developers. That's inclusionary zoning. And it's controversial, for sure. But I find the irony, so many US cities that are run by right-wing Republicans have had inclusionary zoning in place for decades. So it's not new, but it's a mechanism that needs to be openly debated and discussed, and it's up to the city to decide which way they're going to go in that. Yeah, we'll get it in questions. See if you can hold your question. The next one is controversial too. I don't want to put simple stuff up here. So waiving development charges. I suggested that for certain parts of the city. Now let me explain this. This is a really important point. The city has what's called development charges. They charge developers so much per unit that they have to contribute towards providing community services, infrastructure, etc., to make up for the increased density. That's the basic concept. The problem, I think, in the City of Toronto is there's only one size fits all. The same development charge at King and Bay and Yonge and Bloor applies to Mount Dennis. So the developer can pay these big development charges in areas that can support huge development and intensive and well-to-do housing, et cetera, et cetera. Why in God's name would a developer ever pay that same high fee to develop in Mount Dennis? It's a disincentive. So I think that needs to be explored in detail in the study. My suggestion is that yes, you should have development charges for what I call the lands around the crosstown station, because they're going to support intensive development. But I believe you should not have them on Weston Road, because you want to encourage redevelopment on Weston Road of a positive nature. Why would you put roadblocks in place? So that's the nature of the debate, and people have to figure that out for themselves and discuss it. The next one I call radical mixed use. One of the best things about Toronto is that it has a lot of mixed use. Commercial, residential, office, employment, institutional, et cetera, et cetera. But mixed-use buildings all in one building in the same area are really important. If you think of St. Lawrence neighborhood, one of the original mixed-use communities in Toronto, that gives you some sense of the diversity and the variety of activity that exists in that neighborhood. And I had lunch with David Crombie last week, and he just went to give a speech at the 40th anniversary of St. Lawrence neighborhood. So it stood the test of time for 40 years. There's people there in all income groups living in all different types of housing. So that's an issue that needs to be talked about. The other one is what's called mass timber. Generally, buildings are built out of concrete and steel, but lately, the building code has been changed to allow wood buildings to be built up to 6 stories as of right. In British Columbia, they've already built up to 20 stories out of mass timber, wood. This is not like 2x4s. This is like huge, big, mass timber construction. And it's been approved by the respective fire departments across the country, because the mass timber in a fire just gets charred. It doesn't totally burn the way you would think it would. So there's a new area to explore there. And the last is what I'll call performance code zoning. It's basically have a zoning strategy that doesn't talk about necessarily density or specifics. It talks about the performance of the buildings. So as long as the building is within a certain height limit and achieves a mix of various uses and achieves, environmental objectives, performs in a certain way, people can embrace it and move forward in a much quicker way than going through a traditional zoning process. So we can get into that later, but those are just some of the things that I think need to be explored in this area. Next. So I put this in because, as Simon said, when I did the official plan for the City of Toronto after amalgamation, we did a whole series of background studies. This was one of them called Flash Forward. Think of this as a soft sites analysis. What are soft sites? They're basically where you have one-story buildings, gas stations, drive-throughs, stuff that can be redeveloped really easily, right? And we went through the whole City of Toronto, and we looked at these kinds of areas, asked these questions, and the end result of that analysis for the city was that on all of the commercially residential zoned strips, east, west, and north, south throughout the city, if you look, we went and looked at how many of those sites exist. Then we took an assumption of only 10% of them being realistically developable in a quick way. And we assumed a height of just 6 stories, 1 story retail, 5 stories residential. And that produced 120,000 units of housing just by doing that. So the potential for relatively small buildings to provide for housing and achieve different planning goals is really quite substantial. And I think that kind of analysis needs to be done in Mount Dennis as well as part of the work that's going to be done here. Next. So here's some pictures I took of mass timber. You can go see a building that's been built of mass timber in the Liberty Village area. And there's others being proposed in Toronto. This is not just a dream, this is reality. George Brown College is going to propose a mass timber building right in front of the Chorus Entertainment building on the waterfront by Sugar Beach, right in there. And they brought it forward already. The U of T is proposing a 15-story mass timber building on Devonshire near St. George and Bloor. So these things are real. So this is something I think that offers good prospects for Mount Dennis too. Next. Here's a sample of a Main Street building of 6, 7 stories with a green roof, mass timber construction. What's the advantage of doing this? Well, generally speaking, it's a process that is just starting to gain legs. But the fact is, you can build it much, much faster, and you can get it up quicker. And maybe you can translate in terms of cost savings, for the construction side of it. So it offers potential that needs to be explored. Next. Now, it's not all about big buildings. These are buildings on Yonge Street. This has been there forever. This is near the Summerhill liquor store, my favorite liquor store. And this is a relatively new little infill, 5 stories, and it fits right in. And one thing I want you to notice here is that older buildings had much higher floor-to-ceiling heights than new buildings. So 3-story older building equals a 5-story new building. So keep those kinds of things in mind when people say, oh, it's 5 stories or 6 or 3 or whatever. You always got to look at the details. Next. Here's one from possibility in Peterborough. If you've been up there lately, it's fascinating what's going on in downtown Peterborough. They're going through a whole process like this as well, developing a new official plan. And this is one of the prototype buildings being proposed there. And what's interesting about it, I want to put it in to show you, it's on a corner. And remember, corners, because they have 2 fronts, generally can be higher. They can take bigger buildings than mid-block buildings. So another example of what you might see in the future in Mount Dennis. Next. And this is Queen Street, CAMH, many of you know the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. This is a residential rental building that accommodates a wide range of accommodation, right from bachelor up to 3-bedroom. What's interesting is there's a percentage of units in that building for people on ODSP. They pay a maximum of $497 a month rent, right up to full market rates and everything in between. And I think that kind of mix is important, especially in a community like Mount Dennis, where affordable housing is a huge, huge issue. So we got to figure out how to get more of that. Next. So the process ahead is real simple. It's roughly, this is Urban Land Institute. It's got lots of unique opportunities. Going to explore with this Urban Land Institute teams some of these concepts I've been talking about with design studios. And they're going to translate their ideas into images and visuals that they'll present to you next May. Next. So these are some of the possible outcomes. As I said, a vision and action plan that they'll share with you, have design illustrations, strategy for engaging the private sector, to pick up on this eco-neighborhood theme. It's got to meet a financial test. So we take them through a pro forma exercise. What's the land worth? How much does it cost to build? What's the expectation for profit? All those logical things that everybody has to do when redevelopment occurs. And that'll be part of that assessment. Now they're also going to take advantage of fabulous input from city planning staff and economic development staff in the city, because they're doing ongoing studies that I'll talk about very briefly, while Urban Land Institute will be doing our stuff. And then we'll have a presentation of this next May. Next. Okay, so here's roughly how it all fits together. This is what I've been talking about on top, Urban Land Institute. I'm going to briefly talk about the economic development studies that you may have heard about, and then city planning, and then we'll wrap it up. Next. So, how did this start? Well, this is Greg Linton, the current chief planner, who I keep saying is a younger version of me. This is me, this is Francis, and this is Mike Williams, the head of economic development for the city, and Laura Alderson, who's the BIA coordinator here. We went out, and Francis initiated this to say she wanted to get Mike and Greg out to walk, to see, feel, touch what it felt like on Weston Road. And, you know, this is, you all know, south of Eglinton, this is unfortunately what you see. It's a lot of empty storefronts, a lot of really sort of depressing environment. And if you can get up close, I wish you could zero in on this, because if you look at the expression on Mike's face, I think he was in shock, you know, because he hadn't been out here before, you know. So it was very valuable, and I'm glad it happened. And that sort of helped kickstart all this. Next. And that's an image, as you know, we took the picture in front of the Dennis supermarket of, unfortunately, what's there. So it needs a lot of help. And I think the timing of all this stuff coming together is perfect. Next. So here's some of the things the economic development staff are going to do. You know, they're going to create a local strategy focused on revitalization, recognize what opportunities there are for the commercial, for employment, as I've said, look ahead 5 years, and try and tie it all together. Next. Now, many of you know this, when we went to the Learning Enrichment Foundation in Industry Street, we came across this great visual that is up on their wall. And they've done a lot of work. December 18th, 2012. So there's a lot of starting points that are still very valid for this economic development strategy to move forward. When I presented this, the November 17th meeting, a gentleman said to me, he says, yeah, but none of this stuff's happened. And the reality is, good question, why not? How can it now be updated? How can it be moved forward? How can we harness economic development planning and Urban Land Institute and get something good happening here? Next. So these are the basic 4 main phases. You can read it for yourself. They'll go through a process that's outlined here, and they'll come back to you with feedback and implementation. And their timeline, I think, next. Yep. They started gearing up in the fall. They're going to retain a consultant now, and they are looking at finishing that in May, when we're going to finish our thing in Urban Land Institute. So it'll come together. Next. Now, let's quickly go to city planning. And I want to say, Sarah and Vanessa are from the city planning department here, and I'm glad they're here. Just put your hand up. And they're going to be leading this study. So you can maybe chat with them after if you want to find out more information. Next. So what are their problems? Well, one of them is what I call archaic zoning. And the zoning on Weston Road south of Eglinton doesn't allow for any retail. It's zoned residential. So there's no wonder why there's no viable business. It doesn't make sense. And that has to be looked at, and it will, I'm sure, in their study. And I'm sure they'll come forward with appropriate recommendations for new planning and zoning. But the reality is, I try to figure out, why did this happen? And best of my information, I think it happened back in the 80s, and actual zoning change was made in the late 1990s before amalgamation. I don't know what the rationale was, but the point is, I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever to maintain that strip for residential only. It needs to be mixed use. Next. So here's the map that shows the zoning as it exists. This is just to orient you again, Industry Street, the station lands, Weston Road, Eglinton, and you can see the yellow, which is residential south of Eglinton, and the red is the commercial north of Eglinton. So that's all going to be looked at by city planning, among other things. Next. Now back to the inclusionary zoning. This is issue that I think has to be debated. And as far as I know, the city has not decided yet what they're going to do. The province has given them the power to do this, but they haven't decided how to implement it, and to what percentage or what degree or what the formula is. So keep in mind, I think it's powerful. I think whatever it is, 5%, 10%, 20, 15, whatever, I can't help but think if we had inclusionary zoning since the last 20 years, how many units of affordable housing would have been created automatically by the development industry, given all the condos that have been built? So it's an important issue. Next. So here's how planning is going to organize themselves interdisciplinary. I give them full credit. They've got a round table of different departments, different technical people that they're pulling together to make sure that there's no duplication, that everybody's on the same page. Next. And these are some of their outcomes that they think will probably come forward at the end of their study about new zoning, about new official plan policies, design guidelines, whole series of other things on community facilities, streetscape, transportation, et cetera, culture, public health. So it's pretty comprehensive. Next. And their timelines, they're going to go longer because they got a hell of a lot of work to do. And the fact of the matter is they're probably going to come forward next year and present initial ideas to you, and then they'll go back and take the feedback and then finalize them and come forward probably by late 2020. But it's very timely, and it's worth doing. Next. And here, I couldn't resist putting this up because I'm biased. Because city planning is the center of the world here. And the reality is, it does, though, connect all these things together. It pulls all this together. Because if you think about it, when I was chief planner, I used to say to my staff, so just think about what happens to you, each one of you, in your daily life cycle, from the moment you wake up to when you go to bed at night. You live someplace, you work somewhere, you go to school somewhere, you shop someplace, you move around somehow, you go for entertainment, recreation, etc. All of that together is city planning. It affects everybody every single day of their life, but most people don't relate to it that way. So it's really important. Next. Now I wanted to just end on these two. Everybody I think has heard of Regent Park. It's Canada's oldest and largest public housing project down in Dundas and Parliament area. And it went through a massive, and still is going through a massive, rejuvenation, revitalization. And it's controversial, for sure, but what's interesting about it, if you haven't been lately, boy, go there. Here's Parliament, Dundas. Get out the streetcar here and walk to the big new Central Park and the Community Rec Center and look at the variety of different housing that's been created there for all income groups. And how did that happen without government support programs for affordable housing? And you may find this shocking, but the truth is the density was tripled from what it was initially. It was tripled to create increased value for some of these condos and townhouses, etc. The developer still made his profit, and the excess amount was allowed to be funneled back in to still create the same subsidized housing. So it's an interesting model on a citywide basis that's worth taking a close look at. Next. This is some of the, this is a rendering obviously, but some of the types of buildings you see there in terms of high-rise, mid-rise, low-rise, whole wide range of different housing types. The other thing that's very interesting in this project is that there's a branch of the Royal Bank there. There was not a bank branch there for 40 years. People went to check cashing places. That was their banking. And they did the model, you know, what does it take to make a bank viable? And it was rejected. And the leader, the chair of the Royal Bank said, I don't care. We're putting a branch in there because it's that important. And they employed the local people in the branch and trained them. And those kinds of stories, I think, can be duplicated and created all over the place. Next. This one you know, just up the street, the Weston Cultural Center, Rockport. It was controversial, no question. But the fact is it's going to open, I believe, in January, as far as I know. It has a mix. It's a 30-story tower with artscape, live work, housing, and a new cultural hub, and the farmers market's going to be there. And you know, it went through a public process and lots of angst and everything else. But the fact of the matter is, there's 377 units in that building. 80 of them are designated as affordable housing. And that was through a combination of putting together various sources of money from the city and from Rockport and from other sources to in fact ensure that there is an affordable housing component. And I talked to Sean Gadden, who's the director of affordable housing in the city, just yesterday. And I said, you know, what's the timeline that affordability is guaranteed for? And two numbers came back. One, a group of them are guaranteed for 25 years of those affordable housing rates, and another group are guaranteed for 49 years. And that was done very creatively without senior government social housing programs. And I think it's going to be successful, and I think it's going to help kickstart a revitalization in that part of the city as well. So that's a local example. So I think I just got one left, and then we'll wrap it up. Next. Yeah. I want to end on this. So what I'm telling you here is you're sitting at a fantastic location, great opportunity. You guys have done a lot of homework yourself. You're engaged. You want good things to happen, obviously. And you're fortunate because you've got city planning, economic development, and this Urban Land Institute all coming together to help you move that ball forward. And I would just encourage you to think of this famous quote from Daniel Burnham, who did the Chicago plan, which is make no little plans. You're going to have to think big. You're going to have to think comprehensively, because with that transit hub sitting next door, change is going to happen whether you like it or not. And change is inevitable. Growth is optional. And I think you have a choice to make. And my advice to you, after being in the business almost 50 years now, is, boy, take this opportunity. Plan ahead. Be bold, be frank, have debates, arguments, whatever. But make sure you come up with a plan that you're all buying into, and use the next 5 years as that opportunity to do that. Because if you don't, developers will run rampant over this community, and you will not have any opportunity to shape it. So I'm going to end there. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Paul. Well, here it is. Before we go to the questions, I'm going to make this presentation available online, probably not before Saturday. You don't have to worry about getting copies of it. It will be online. I believe most of it's a PowerPoint, so we'll probably need a direct download, but we'll also try and make it available on the website. And conversion, that's what's going to take time. So now we'll go to questions. So are there any questions? Right here.
I just have a question about.
You gotta speak up. Everybody needs to hear you.
I just have a question about parking minimums. It tends to be a contentious issue at meetings that happen about development. But I also find that it could be detrimental for neighborhoods because parking minimums could require garages that will then require more buildings or just ugly massive parking lots. So what are we looking at in regards to that? Because everybody's also concerned about parking.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. and I'm going to ask Sarah and Vanessa if they also want to chime in as part of these questions and answers here. My sense is that's part of the planning study. You have to look at what the standard is now. Does it make any sense, or is it so outdated that you need to revise it? And generally, the direction that's happening in the city is to reduce the parking standards that are required. If you go to so many of these big apartment buildings in the city, even condos, but especially the rental buildings, you go to the parking garage, it's half empty. And it doesn't make any sense to require these expensive underground parking garages to be built. They're going to sit there empty. And people are opting in, as you know, for car share and these kinds of different models. Some developers now are, for condos anyway, when you're buying a unit, they'll have 2 car shares that they buy, and they're in the garage, and people can sign them in and out, etc. There's all kinds of different proposals. But, you know, I think that's the direction. You want to add to that?
That was a good answer. I was going to come up but you're doing well. I'll just hover in case.
Okay, all right.
Like, it just seems like an opportunity. We want to meet this equal neighborhood. We're not going to get any funding from the government, so why not start now where we can be an example where we don't need parking minimums here. There's actually a great video in Calgary that explains why we would want to get rid of them. You couldn't create a neighborhood, let's say like in West Bay, because they didn't have parking minimums when they had horse and carriage, right? But now these parking minimums have, I mean, we just built something new off of Wilson Station, the shops at Wilson Station, on the subway station, and it's covered in parking. That's ugly. That is ugly.
No, I mean, I agree. But I'm biased. You're talking, I haven't owned a car since 1992. I don't need it. You know, I live downtown, transit everywhere, I rent a car whenever I want one. But so, you know, I'm lucky I have that opportunity. But I think the general other thing I'd ask you to think about is cars are expensive. Everybody reads about GM, what's going on these days, which is tragic. But the reality is, I did this calculation. If you go on the Canadian Automobile website, do it yourself. The average cost of owning and operating a car in the city of Toronto is about $10,000 to $12,000 a year, all in, everything. You know, I mean, depreciation, the whole deal, maintenance, everything. Well, I used to tell my students at U of T, well, you're 25. You're going to work for 40 years till you're 65. And if you buy 2 cars over 40 years, do the math. You just spend $1 million on cars that are worth nothing at the end. I mean, you know, is that smart economics? I don't think so. So there's a personal side of that people need to think about. But you have to have the transit choices and the options if you don't provide the parking. You have to have other ways to get around. And fortunately, you've got all this stuff coming. So I think it's a good discussion for you to have among yourselves. Oh, sorry.
I'll just do a very quick answers. That's a good point you make. As Paul said, like, I agree with everything that he's put forward. And we are looking at parking rates across the city in different ways, but the planning study is an opportunity for us to take a more of a focus on Mount Dennis and what's going to work here. So that's something that's on our list. We've got it written down, but that's something that we'll be looking at through the planning framework.
Okay, other questions?
Thank you for the presentation. My name's Yafet. In your experience, since 50 years at this, you raised a lot of good points around having eco neighborhoods involved, and obviously housing strategy and transit. What would you say are some of the things we should be thinking about as a community in terms of planning ahead to get the province and the feds involved in these conversations as well too? Because they obviously have a say here. Are there things beyond inclusionary zoning we should be thinking about? And in your experience, what are some of the gaps where maybe they haven't been as involved?
Yeah, well, I tried to give you the start of a list. Remember about mass timber, inclusionary zoning, radical mixed use, all these kinds of things. Performance code zoning, something else you may be surprised. If you go on the website, the city of Miami, Florida, of all places, has adopted citywide a performance code zoning approach. So it's not the traditional zoning where you have all the usual stuff. It's a performance-based code. And so these things are like happening out there. They're real, and they're more effective because they allow you to target, in this case, the eco-neighborhood agenda more specifically. I believe, Mike, you said there's representatives of the provincial and federal elected officials here tonight. Is that right? No?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, then talk to them. Get them involved. Get them to play a role in these studies that are ongoing here.
I'll come around. Yeah, the question was just related to the summer. Just related to the timelines that you presented for the study. That I saw from October to May, but that group goes away and then comes back and presents something. But is there an opportunity for them to come and present something interim? Because I'm a principal in an architecture and planning office, and it's a great thing that you're doing, but they can go away and do a study for a developer, and we do it all the time. But I think what kind of you miss out on kind of engaging the community, especially this community here. It is just allowing kind of planners and architects and urban designers to kind of get more involved and engaged. Just run a different type of process than what they would typically do for a development application.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Sarah to comment on that because I think this is why I tried to. There's 3 tracks here. There's the Urban Land Institute leadership thing that I've talked about, and they'll be doing their stuff and they'll be engaging back and forth. But the main opportunity for that is city planning and economic development. So I'm going to ask Sarah to comment.
So I take it that you mean the planning framework study? Is that what you're thinking?
I'm thinking it's more the ULI because I think that's the more inspirational one. That's the more fluid one. That's the more fun one. I think that's more informative of the work that you're doing. I think once it gets to the city's hands, it's very rigid. I find like what the real opportunities that Paul's going to explore with this group are far more exciting and innovative. And I think that's where you want to get the community engaged on that side.
Well, we're hoping to have the community engaged in the planning framework too. So, one of the reasons.
You have to do that by rule, but I'm just thinking the ULI to make it valuable for the people there. Because I see the planners that I work with. It's great because they're not the demographic that are at the senior levels of planning. And just to get young people that are engaged in communities that look like them, it's hugely beneficial to
this community is quite unique, and I think you missed out in the process.
Well, I'll make a quick plug for the planning framework first. One of the things that we're excited about is that ULI is here and running a little bit before us. So you're right in the fact that the ULI process is more about innovative ideas. We're hoping that those ideas are something that we can look at and maybe incorporate into the planning framework if they work. We're looking forward to the results of that and to see through our process what can work, what might not work, and more from a sort of a realistic point of view. There's a lot of great ideas. Maybe they won't work right now. Maybe it's something we can work towards in the future. But we're really excited doing the planning framework to have this process running before us.
This will be our last question.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I mean, I appreciate that comment, and don't worry, I'm going to keep pushing these people to, reach out, because one of the sessions you may have not noticed up there, in March, I think it is, I just called it "Break the Rules." The hell with it. Come up with total innovation, new approaches to a whole bunch of things, and I'm really going to challenge these people because they're young and keen and energetic, and they've got lots of energy. So stay tuned.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michelle Lopez. You're going to have to excuse my excitement to come here and ask this question. So if it's out of this platform, I do apologize in advance. I do apologize in advance if my question is not related to tonight's meeting. I'm a parent of 2 small children, and what I've done in the last 4 years is have to get out of this community to find something of interest for them on an educational level, early years development. So it's very popular for us, a lot of parents, to go down to the junction, go to the Hyde Park area, check out different areas like that. And then to my surprise, it flowed into my son's education. So that to get French immersion, it's actually coming out of this area, it's going into Etobicoke, South, the junction area again. Annette, there's like 3 French immersion schools along there. So how can I, my vision here is to petition to the school board, relative school board, to bring in French immersion to this school's area, in this area, because we have the families that from Lawrence, from Trethewey, Lawrence areas, Weston and Jane, they have to go all the way south to Annette. So now families have a card, and even in my experience of taking transit, it was a dangerous experience many times because there's not a crosswalk in front of my building to access Edmonton, and then Jane, and so on and so forth. So how can I get support maybe from what we're gathered here today for, in order to petition maybe on I can represent, and someone can help me back me up on that. And as well, in my going out of areas, even splash pads, going to Stockyards for a splash pad, going to Rockland Smythe for a splash pad, going to Hyde Park. But it's nothing right at Weston and Eglinton. It's a dry desert zone during the summer. So again, I apologize if my questions were a bit out of line.
No, that's a very good question actually, because like pretty much everything that you spoke about are things that we're going to be looking at through the planning framework. As part of the planning framework study, we're looking at a number of different things, but we also have, Paul mentioned, there was one slide with the roundtable components. That was just sort of a sampling of the different divisions within the city and the agencies that we're working with. The school boards are also participating, and we'll be taking comments back to them with what we hear at community meetings. But we're also doing what we call a community services and facilities component in the study, which looks at all of the types of facilities that you were talking about. What kind of community facilities are in Mount Dennis? Are they sufficient? Where are they? Are they easy to get to or not? And if there's a deficiency, then where is it at? And how can that be augmented through future development opportunities? Excuse me. We're also looking at connectivity through Mount Dennis, pedestrian connectivity, cycling pathways, vehicular connectivity, all of those things. So crosswalks is something good for us to understand where there are issues now and where there is a need. Also, if you're having to take the bus out of the area to certain facilities, where you need to go, how that all works. So all of those things that you mentioned are things that we're going to be looking at through the planning framework. So I would really encourage you to come out to our community meetings. There's people like you we need to hear from, and what your challenges are and where they are. And that will help inform us when we do our work.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I think we've heard a range of comments on why we need this study and what needs to be done for our community. Okay, we do have to move on the agenda now. We're going to talk with our treasurer, who's going to tell us that we've done pretty well this year, actually. And then we'll be doing some introductions and allowing the politicians to make their presentation, and then we'll be doing the election.
Thank you.
I didn't introduce you yet.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Don Thompson. This is my first year treasurer. I was on board for about 2 years now. Our fiscal 2017 statement was prepared by a local business, Canada Professional Accountants, and we filed that with Revenue Canada. We started off 2017 with an approximate surplus of $2,300. Our total income for 2017 was approximately $20,000. Most of that was gained through our advertisements and our newsletter, and then grants, and then some small donations. Total expenses, approximately $18,000. Once again, our newsletter costs are the highest, and then we use a lot of the money that we gain from the advertisements to put on events like tonight. This left us in 2017 with a year-end surplus of approximately $4,400. So we're in good shape. For 2018, the numbers won't be released until a little bit later in the first quarter of next year. And I expect we're going to have a healthy surplus similar to the 2017 fiscal year. By the end of March next year, we'll file again with the CRA, and then we'll post those numbers again. If anybody wants to know any details, I have a report here, but you can come and see me if you want anything specific, because it's people love money, but talking about it is kind of a little bit dull. Anyhow, I'm going to hand it over to Judith, our VP.
Thank you. Thank you, Don, for all your work you've done. I'm Judith Hayes, Vice President of Mount Dennis Community Association, and I'd like to welcome the politicians and their reps who are here. We're running a little bit late, so if you'd like to come up to the front and say a few words. First of all, our Councillor Francis Nunziata from Ward 5, and we've got a rep from Faisal and from Ahmed. Francis?
So why don't you let them go first?
Okay.
Then when I speak, I'll go into the election.
All right, Francis has got to slide into the elections. Would you like to come and speak from Faisal's office?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anika Mark. I am one of 3 constituency assistants for MPP Faisal Hassan, who was elected in June for the NDP party. Very exciting stuff. Our new office is 1965 Weston Road, very accessible by transit. 89 and the 52 run by there. And on December 7th from 2 to 5, we're going to be having our community open house, which is a great way for members of the community to come and know what our office can do for you. Faisal will be there. And he'll be, you can have introductions with him, ask him some questions, and if you have any provincial issues at all, we'll be taking notes as well, so please feel free to stop by. Yeah, I think that's it for us. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we've got some reps from Ahmed Hassan's office.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me so far, my name is Alex. I'm here on behalf of the Honorable MP Ahmed Hussein. Unfortunately, the minister is away on ministerial duties, but he sends his greetings in this short video.
Hi, everyone. I apologize for not being able to join you here today at your AGM, but I'm in Ottawa representing you and working for you. The Mount Dennis community, I want to congratulate all of you for your work in having an ambitious target of being Toronto's first net zero community. This builds on the amazing record that you've had in making sure that the Metrolinx gas plant is replaced by a more environmentally sustainable alternative. Here in Ottawa, the Liberal government is your partner, making sure that we make historic investments in infrastructure, in public transit. We put a price on pollution, making buildings more energy efficient and protecting our oceans and waterways. We will continue to work with communities like Mount Dennis to make sure that we have a stronger economy, but also a greener economy and a more environmentally sustainable future for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much. I would have loved to join you at your AGM. I wish you all the best as you proceed on the amazing work that you do every single day in our community.
So we're going to have Francis going to speak to you and have our elections quickly, and then there's goodies at the back, and then all these fascinating points that Paul brought up for you to discuss. Is this working?
Did you touch the switch?
Oh, sorry. Sorry. And so after our elections, which will be real quick, then we're going to have goodies, and then you can discuss all of these fascinating points that Paul brought up.
Okay, thank you, Judith. I won't be long because I know we have the elections, and we're a little behind. But first of all, I want to thank the MDCA for hosting tonight's AGM. Great crowd. I think it's one of the biggest we've had, right? And welcome to the York Recreation Center. It's in a beautiful facility, and welcome to everyone that showed an interest in hearing Paul Bedford tonight. Paul, thank you. Now, Paul worked with us in Weston as well a few years ago with ULI, and we did a project. We did a charrette in Weston, and I'm very pleased that ULI has chosen to come to Mount Dennis as well, and we have another planning study that's planned for Weston as well, and I'm hoping ULI will come back to Weston again, Paul? Okay. Anyway, so I just want to thank the MDCA and all the work they do for the community. As it was mentioned, they have their newsletters that go out and they get sponsorship. They do a lot of events. They work with the BIA in the area, a lot of community events. You were recently at the Santa Claus Parade. I noticed you were walking with a banner, Judith, you and Rick. Where was Simon? Oh, I didn't see you. Oh, okay.
Siobhan was the snowman.
Oh, Siobhan was the snowman. Well, it was a great event. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I just want to thank MDCA for the hard work they do for Mount Dennis and all the community work. And I'm looking forward to the planning study that we're going to be starting very shortly. And we will be having community meetings, and we will be engaging the community absolutely. So I'm going to proceed now because we have the elections. And I'm going to pass it on to Simon to start off.
Thank you, and congratulations, by the way, on your re-election, Francis. Our Constitution requires that we have a member of City Council supervise our election, which is, and that it happen at a public meeting, which is why we have it every year as part of this AGM. So, first of all, to be recognized as a member of the MDCA, to be eligible to vote at this meeting or to be elected to the board, a person must be one of three things: a resident of Mount Dennis, or the owner, operator, or manager of a business in Mount Dennis, or the single designated representative of a local institution serving Mount Dennis. So only those people can be elected, only those people can vote. But if you meet those criteria, you can feel free to vote, and we generally do it informally with a show of hands. First item is the election of officers. MDCA has 4 officer positions, and you've met the current incumbents this evening. One of them is president, the next is vice president, next is secretary, and the last is treasurer. And to be elected to any of these positions, a person must be eligible and have served 1 full year on the MDCA board within the past 5 years. So you can't just vault straight onto the board and into one of those 4 officer positions. This year there are 15 people who technically meet that requirement. I was going to read all the names, but I think it probably, if anybody wants the names, I've got them. But and I'll just hand over to Francis at this point.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, so the outgoing board is recommending re-election of 4 individuals for re-election to the officer positions for 2018. President Mike Matos, Vice President Judith Hayes, Secretary Simon Chamberlain. Simon, you've been a treasurer forever.
Secretary.
Oh, you're secretary, sorry. Okay, you're the secretary, but you were the treasurer one time. Treasurer Don Thompson. Don?
Yeah.
You take care of the money, right?
Yeah.
So I would like to ask at this point, are there any further nominations? Are there any further nominations? Going once, twice? Okay. Can I have a motion to nominate? Simon? Oh, okay. Can I have an individual that would nominate the 4 positions? Okay, Rick Ciccarelli. Okay, seconded by Josie.
I nominate Simon and Judith.
Okay, well we're doing all of them. All of them. Okay. All in favor? Carried. Opposed, if any? Okay, thank you. Now, election of board members at large. Anyone qualified for MDCA membership may be elected to the board as a member at large. There is no specified limit on the number of members at large who can serve on the board in any 1 year, but for reasons of practicality, the outgoing board proposes a maximum total board membership not to exceed 18 people, including the 4 officers. Those elected to the board are expected to attend monthly meetings, generally on a Wednesday evening, and most MDCA activities and events. The outgoing board recommends the following individuals for appointments as board members at large for 2018. Janessa Cote. Janessa, are you here? Pardon? She had to leave. Okay. Siobhan Delaney. Siobhan? She's not here. Okay, I'm going to make this easy. Queenie? Pardon? Oh, she's in South Pacific. Oh, wow. Okay. Johnny Dibb, I know you're here. John Amal Javier? Okay. Stacy Greaves? Is Stacy here? Oh, everybody's away. Elliot Strachan? Elliot, you're here? I'm not going to do, I'll do the rest after. Do you want me? Okay, and then we have Rick Ciccarelli for Community Action Resource Center. Rick, you're here. Sophie Newman for Mount Dennis Neighborhood Center. Sophie? Okay. Marlene McIntosh for Urban Arts. Marlene. Michael Cadera for Young Street Mission. Are you here? He's not here, okay. Are there any further nominations from members at large?
Anyone who lives in Mount Dennis can nominate themselves. If you want to do it, go for it. If you think you can attend the meetings, go for it. Michelle? Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, I nominate Michelle.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so, we have a nomination for Michelle. Michelle, what is your last name so we can record it?
Lopez.
Lopez? Okay. Thank you. Are there any further nominations? Okay. Josie, would you like to move the nomination?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And who would like to second it? Can I have a seconder, please? Okay. We have a seconder. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Now, the board will be delighted to welcome up to 3 additional members at large for 2019, such that the total board members does not exceed 18. So, do we have any further nominations for members at large? Any further nominations? No?
I nominate Sunny. You can do Sunny. I nominate Sunny.
Okay, Sunny. And Sunny, okay, hold on. Sunny, your last name, please? Okay. Who's taking the minutes? Simon, I thought you were taking the minutes. Do I have to go through this all over again? Okay. Okay, Rick is Simon is taking the minutes. Okay, do we have any further nominations? Okay. All in favor? Carried. Opposed, if any? Okay. And that's the end of the elections. Congratulations to all the members that were elected. I just wish all elections were this fast. Thank you.
Thank you for explaining.
Thank you, Francis. Well, right now we're going to have our refreshments. I would like to acknowledge our, I think she was our first cabinet minister in York Southwestern, Laura Albanese, who's come to join us tonight. She was a very good friend to the Community Association and looked after the community very well. And thank you very much for what you've done for our community, Laura. We have water here. Oh.
Can I just ask people, new people to the board, to see Simon, give him your contact information, please? So, decaf, and I don't take coffee there.
Yeah, we'll bring the water to the back so it's all together.
Sausage from our new Portuguese bakery, and
Okay, so go get some food.
Okay, that's the end of the live broadcast.
Your tripod here. Very inventive.
Yeah.